The Broadway show Wicked premiered on October 30th, 2003 at the Gershwin Theater in New York, based on the best-selling book of the same name by Gregory Maguire. The musical is an origin story based on The Wizard of Oz, starring Idina Menzel as Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, telling how she went from social outcast to activist scapegoated by an oppressive government.
No one mourns the wicked, no one cries, they won't return.
Kristen Chenoweth starred as Glinda, her best friend, who becomes a propaganda mouthpiece for the oppressive government despite her history and continued desire for friendship with Elphaba. The play won 3 Tonys, Best Actress for Idina Menzel, Best Scenic Design, and Best Costume Design, but lost the coveted Best Musical award to Avenue Q, which came out the same year.
It sucks to beat you, you win. It sucks to beat you. I feel better now.
Naturally, of course, there was talks of a film adaptation. After almost a decade in production hell, it finally premiered in November 2024, starring Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba and pop star Ariana Grande as Glinda. And naturally, because I'm an annoying theater kid, I dragged my boyfriend to see it, and then his mother, and I've now watched it 100 times since it was on streaming. And really, I was shocked at just how good the film was. But more shocked at the amount of backlash it received about it being too political by casting a black woman, Cynthia Erivo, as Elphaba, and Latina actress Ariana Grande as Glinda.
Let's just start with the fact that they have Ariana Grande, who is obviously a Hispanic woman.
Sorry, princess.
She's Italian.
Playing the part of a ditzy blonde white.
She's white. Many audiences were livid about bringing racial politics into the film.
The racism and the racial appropriation I just thought was offensive, frankly.
To that I have to say, Elphaba is green. She's quite literally a person of color. There were always racial undertones. Casting a black woman in the role of Elphaba was not only a brave choice, but honestly a necessary one. She wasn't a DEI hire. Hold on.
Be nice.
I'm finding it.
It take you that long to find it?
It does.
Casting a black woman as Elphaba was the choice most necessary to prevent viewers from being able to divorce the themes of racism from the story. All this controversy surrounding the film really got me thinking about how film as a medium is a form of art that can truly challenge its viewers' biases as a whole, and due to its accessibility with so many ways to view it, even if it is just 1-minute clips on TikTok, it can actually challenge a larger audience than most any other form of media. And nowhere is that better exemplified than in the 1940 film The Great Dictator.
Mit Hülsensekt, der Wiener Schnitzel mit der Lagerwerten und das Sauerkraut.
The Great Dictator was a film written, directed, produced, and starring famed silent film comedian Charlie Chaplin. It was a satire, and a thinly veiled one at that, telling the story of an unnamed Jewish barber, played by Charlie Chaplin, who saves the life of a superior officer in the First World War, and then receives an injury that leaves him in a coma for 20 years.
We're upside down. I know it.
When he wakes up, he goes home to the fictional country of Tovania, where he finds that his country has been taken over by a Tomanian regime. His neighborhood has become a ghetto, and he and his fellow Jews are living under persecution from the Tomanian regime. Every day they face harassment, violence, and intimidation at the hands of the soldiers and the government. This aspect of the film is contrasted by the secondary story of the dictator of Tomania, Edohoid Hinkel, also played by Charlie Chaplin, as he makes plans to invade the nearby fictional country of Austerlitz in an attempt to fulfill his desire to become emperor of the world.
Yes, dictator of the world. We'll start with the invasion of Austerlitz. After that, you won't have to fight, we can bluff. Nation after nation will capitulate. Within 2 years, the world will be under your thumb.
Leave me. I want to be alone.
The film is such a thinly veiled satire, I cannot emphasize that enough. The soldiers of the Tomanian regime are referred to as stormtroopers.
It's the stormtroopers!
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
There's an emphasis on the importance of Aryan blood.
We'll kill off the Jews, wipe out the brunettes. Then will come forth our dream, a pure Aryan race.
And when saluting their dictator, they even used the Sieg Heil that was used by Nazis at the time.
Hail Hinkle.
Who's he?
One of the right-hand men of Hinkel, clearly based off of Himmler, is a man who is literally named Garbage.
Garbage. Herr Garbage,
He is now addressing Herr Garbage, Minister of the Interior.
Herr Garbage.
Hinkel, the dictator himself, is depicted as a coward who showboats and allows his own personal slights to dictate the rules, sending not just political adversaries to concentration camps, but anyone who dares to disagree with him when his plans are objectively terrible.
We're going to stage a little medieval entertainment in the ghetto.
At such a time, Your Excellency, I think it's ill-advised.
What? I shall send you to a concentration camp.
Guards!
Charlie Chaplin was not a fan of Nazis, and he let everyone know about it. It is appreciated, though, that the one thing that does not get satired or parodied in any way is the treatment of Jewish people within the fictional country.
There goes the barber shop.
Never mind, we can start again. We can go to Austerlitz, that's still a free country. Mr. Jekyll says it's beautiful there. Wonderful green fields, and they grow apples and grapes.
Despite the film being a comedy, it takes great care to seriously highlight Jewish communities and our struggles.
You leave that alone. Don't be silly. I'm not silly. I appreciate that. When you talk to me, hail Hinkle and salute. Who are you anyway?
It treats the Jewish characters as normal, everyday people trying to live their lives during Nazi oppression in World War II. The fact that their lives are so normal is almost antithetical to what we think of when we think of communities living under oppression, but it's actually quite common for oppressed people to live relatively normal lives throughout any dark time in history.
Good morning, Mr. Jacob.
What's good about it?
Well, conditions could be worse.
If you think they could be worse, you have a great imagination.
In a world that constantly wants you dead, the sheer act of living is the bravest form of rebellion that one can make. But just because the Jewish people in the film are living everyday lives under oppression, the film never fails to remind you that they shouldn't have to. They should be able to live wherever they want instead of being forced into ghettos where stormtroopers torment them on the daily. But they can't, and the film makes sure you know exactly why. Not just because they themselves are somehow bad or even perfect victims, but because of one man.
His Excellency has just referred to the Jewish people.
Charlie Chaplin had a strange fascination with Adolf Hitler, or rather with the uncanny similarities between the two. Charlie Chaplin and Adolf Hitler were both born in April 1889, only 4 days apart from each other, both from very humble working-class families. Neither had prominent father figures in their lives, with Adolf's father dying in 1903 and Charlie's alcoholic father separating from his mother at a very young age. Their mothers faced hardships as a result of both of these events, as Charlie's mother was admitted to an asylum later in life, and Adolf's mother died of breast cancer when he was 18. Both struggled with poverty and homelessness. Both had very famous, or rather infamous, interest in the arts, and they even look similar, something that Chaplin used heavily in the making of The Great Dictator. Chaplin even stated at one point, "Just think, he's the madman, I'm the comic." But it could have been the other way around. Chaplin got the initial inspiration to write the film based on real things that he was hearing from Jewish friends who were still overseas in Europe. Hence, the emphasis on the lives of Jewish people in the ghetto under persecution of the stormtroopers. This is extremely significant because in a post-World War I America, despite us providing support to the Allied forces, our country was still deeply in our isolation period, preferring to avoid any topic surrounding the tensions in Germany. Though the average American had some knowledge of the rising dictatorship, unless they had close family or friends, there was a sort of culture of apathy for the struggles of other people overseas. It was not only his connections with Jewish people in Europe that led to Charlie Chaplin to have a disgust over said apathy, but also his own experiences with anti-Semitism that led to his frustration over the lack of care. Charlie Chaplin faced a lot of hatred for being a prominent Jewish man in the industry. There was only one problem with his hatred of his Jewishness. It didn't exist. Charlie Chaplin was a goy, or for you non-Jews out there, he was a Gentile. Side note, goyim and goy are not slurs, despite the belief of many an anti-Semite. It is simply a term for non-Jews, and in the same way many marginalized communities have words for people who are not them, it's simply an identifier for people who are not in the community. Just like cis is not a slur, neither is goyim. By the way, TERFs, cis is not a slur. Shuck off! Charlie Chaplin was often mistaken for Jewish, especially by Nazis who once denounced him as one of the foreign Jews who come to Germany. This again highlights the similarities between the two, as Hitler was also theorized to be Jewish, which is just not true. Unlike Hitler, however, who virulently denied and attempted to disprove the claim that he was Jewish, Charlie Chaplin either evaded the question entirely or simply stated that he's not, nor has he ever claimed to be Jewish, but also never would protest when people claimed he was, because if he had been, he would have been proud to be Jewish. Charlie took great pride in his connections to Jewish people, furthering his solidarity with the marginalized underclass. Now, why am I spending so much time focusing on all this historical bullshit? All of this is deeply entrenched in his reasoning behind creating what would eventually become one of the most influential films of all time. When creating The Great Dictator and deciding to invest $2 million out of his own pocket, he was warned that the film would be a financial flop and lose him all $2 million. Purportedly, he responded that he didn't care if the film lost $5 million, he was still going to do it, as its message was too important. It mattered to him to speak out about fascism, and despite being a silent film actor, he was not going to be silent. Now, of course, there are some criticisms to be had of the film, particularly with its usage of slapstick and silly humor in scenes in the ghetto, and even later in a concentration camp, something that Charlie Chaplin himself would later regret. Though there was some knowledge of concentration camps at the time of the film's debut in 1940, aside from very few Jews fleeing Nazi persecution who had managed to make it to America during that time, there was no knowledge of exactly how horrible the concentration camps were, and especially no knowledge of the extermination that was already well underway by this point. There weren't even anti-war protests in the United States until 1 month before the film premiered, and even then, the protests weren't against what was happening in Europe, but rather the United States' participation in funding and supplying aid to the people fighting the 1939 invasion of Poland. Gee, people protesting helping a country trying to fight off invasion? Wonder what that's like. It wasn't until 1943, 3 years after the film's debut, that the majority of Americans even knew that Jews were being slaughtered, and even then, most estimated that the numbers were around 100,000 as opposed to the 4.8 million that had already been killed at this point. After the discovery of the full-scale atrocities done by the Nazi regime, Charlie Chaplin stated he would never have made such light of the Nazis had he known. Now, I'm not usually one to disagree with the greats. Okay, well, I am, especially when it comes to the male greats. Shark you, Stanley Kubrick, you know what you did.
We're sitting there because they say, wait a minute, and then you say on the radio,
but when you do it, you've got to look desperate, Charlie. You're just wasting everybody's time now.
I can't even get this door open. You have on the record.
But I do really have to disagree with Chaplin here. Now, am I saying that we can or should make light of the horrors of the Holocaust? Absolutely not.
The Holocaust was a really big deal. Remember that we suffered.
Despite being both a commercial and critical success, I think making a screwball comedy like Life is Beautiful about a family finding joy in a concentration camp is deeply disrespectful, especially in 1997 when we were well aware of the impacts of the Holocaust.
Non chiedete lecca lecca perché non ve li danno, ce li mangiamo tutti noi. Antreten in zwei Reihe. Io ieri ne ho mangiati 20. Schweigt! Mal di pancia. Jeden Morgen. Però erano buoni. Ist Appell. Lascia fare. So, das wollte ich euch noch sagen. Dort hinten werdet ihr arbeiten. Ihr werdet die Dimensionen des Lagers leicht begreifen. Scusate se vado di fretta, ma oggi sto giocando a nascondino. Ora vado, se no mi fanno tana.
But despite that, I do still think that there is power in making some light and comedy out of Hitler and the Nazis themselves.
Have we mentioned Hitler? I'm just saying that we suffered.
Legendary comedic filmmaker Mel Brooks has practically made a career out of making fun of Hitler and the Nazis.
There's no greater dictator in the land.
Similar to Charlie Chaplin using Nazi propaganda as an influence in the making of The Great Dictator, Mel Brooks used Leni Riefenstahl's Nazi propaganda as inspiration in his famous film and musical, The Producers.
And now it's
People often forget that Mel Brooks served in the Air Force during World War II, giving him, as a Jewish man, an even further personal stake in facing the atrocities of Hitler and the Nazi regime. And yet, as a response, Mel Brooks has used Hitler as a punchline ever since, because according to him, the only way to get even with anybody is to ridicule them.
I want to thank Hitler for being such a funny guy on stage.
And he's not the only filmmaker to do so. During the making of Jojo Rabbit, filmmaker Taika Waititi, an indigenous Maori Jew, portrayed Hitler as a silly imaginary friend, with Taika stating that he did absolutely no research for the role, both because he wanted to play Hitler as a fantasy buffoon rather than reality.
Hire me? For old time's sake?
Fuck off, Hitler!
And also because Hitler wasn't worth the effort.
Because a lot of people don't know this about you, but you're Jewish. And then like you have Jewish family.
That makes it okay.
No, but I'm saying like...
Jewish director and filmmaker Steven Spielberg famously made the Nazis look like absolute idiots in Indiana Jones, making ridiculous and stupid decisions. Side story, I once actually had a goy cite Spielberg in a debate as an example of good depictions of Nazis by non-Jewish directors. His name is Steven Spielberg. The man is a Jew. Lindsay Ellis has a great video about depictions of Nazis and their effects on anti-Semitism in film, something that I'm going to encourage you watch via the link down below, where she goes even further in depth about this topic than I'm able to do here. But I have to say, Nazis should be made fun of. Neo-Nazis and far-right groups absolutely hate portrayals like those done by Mel Brooks because it only serves to discredit and undermine their attempts to normalize the ideology in modern day.
Well, that's all I've known.
Isn't it weird that in 2019, someone still has to make a movie trying to explain to people not to be a Nazi?
And anything that pisses off neo-Nazis is A-okay in my book. The fact that The Great Dictator is a comedy is not a bug in my opinion, but a feature. Black comedy as a film genre is known for using satire for serious or tragic events in order to make commentary on things that are considered to be social taboos. In order to make its points, it often uses tools like shock value or exaggeration, deadpan delivery, contrasting visuals juxtaposing with dark themes with extremely bright colors or cheerful presentations of what is happening. A perfect example of this type of film in modern day would be 2021's Promising Young Woman, which utilized all of these tools in order to make commentary on rape culture from the perspective of a woman who pretends to be drunk in clubs until some nice guy takes her home and attempts to assault her. She doesn't actually kill or harm any of them, but instead just drops the act and makes them confront the fact that they were purposefully taking advantage of an incapacitated girl, whether they want to acknowledge it or not.
Hey, Neil. Yeah. They said I need to go home.
Holy shit.
It juxtaposes these themes with a soft pink color scheme, film angles satirizing the male gaze in media surrounding women, and its emphasis on using music from female songwriters and musicians. Like many dark comedies, this film was widely controversial in both its usage of dark comedy and its subject matter as a whole, which, by the way, this film is my litmus test for men. If you're angry about the depiction of boys in this film, that's because you're in it.
I mean, it's every guy's worst nightmare getting accused like that.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
Despite what the Oscars tell you every year about Oscar-baity historical dramas being the most important and impactful ways of spreading awareness and making social change, I often find the exact opposite is true. When you add comedy to a dark subject, instead of distancing an audience from the darkness of what they're witnessing, it actually serves to further emphasize the commentary and really force its audience to reflect on their own participation in the taboos it's highlighting.
I'm a nice guy.
Are you?
Instead of characters like Kevin Costner in Hidden Figures, a fictional figure added to the film in order to give white people a character to relate to.
No more colored restrooms. No more white restrooms. Just plain old toilets.
Dark comedies like Get Out give us characters like Dean Armitage, who...
By the way, I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
Instead of Armie Hammer as the supportive husband of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the film On the Basis of Sex.
He's never gonna take me seriously.
No, that's not true. You're the smartest person here, and you're going to be the most prepared.
We get Ryan, a promising young woman who, despite seeming like a genuinely nice and supportive boyfriend who would never take advantage of an incapacitated girl, he was still recorded sitting back and watching as Cassie's best friend was sexually assaulted during a party.
Wait, is that... I don't want to look at that, Cassie.
Well, why not? You were happy to watch back then.
What are you talking about? I wasn't...
Instead of making audience members feel comfortable that they themselves would be the good one in the times of horror, black comedies alienate its audience and highlight moments where they themselves may have participated in or been complicit about the very hatred that they convey they care about. The Great Dictator is no different in this aspect. Yes, it does use slapstick when portraying some of the abuse of the stormtroopers. However, is it not shocking to watch them go from slapstick comedic shenanigans to nearly publicly hanging a Jewish man just for the sheer act of defending himself after being assaulted by a soldier? Yes, the film makes Hinkle, aka Hitler, into a dramatic megalomaniac buffoon and coward whining and arguing with the Mussolini stand-in over who gets to invade Austerlitz first, but doesn't that also paint a clear picture of what exactly was happening in Europe at the time with the alliance of Germany and Italy? Given the fact that Charlie Chaplin was famous for his slapstick comedy, a genre widely popular with audiences at the time, is this not an example of one of the greatest bait and switches in film history? Luring audiences in with slapstick only to shock and hit them with that famous speech, a scathing but optimistic condemnation of fascism that forces audiences to really confront the atrocities of the hatred of men. And while we're at it, yes, let's talk about the moment of the hour, one of the most famous monologues in film history and the inspiration behind the making of this video. At the end of The Great Dictator, after escaping from the concentration camp with former officer of the Tomanian regime, Officer Schultz, the unnamed Jewish barber, played by Charlie Chaplin, is mistaken for the dictator Hinkle and expected to give a speech to the Tomanian troops as they prepare their attack on the fictional country of Austerlitz. He's told to give a speech to inspire the troops as to why it was important and their right to invade, and how he, as their dictator, was going to bring them into greatness by conquering and ridding the world of the non-desirables who didn't have Aryan bloodlines or blonde hair and blue eyes.
Beautiful blonde Aryan.
They will love you, they will adore you.
Instead of faking some sort of speech, the barber decides to talk about how he doesn't want to be a dictator, and he talks about the good in humanity that we are designed to love, but greed and tyranny have convinced us to hate. Instead of marching, he urges the soldiers to lay down their weapons in a plea for peace, that we are better than the wars of men, only using us for their grab of power. The monologue is roughly 5 minutes long, and given that this was Charlie Chaplin's first speaking role in any film, for many viewers, this was the first time they had ever heard him speak. The first significant speech of his that they ever heard was a condemnation that actively called out racism and fascism in a plea for people to take back the power given to dictators and remember the love that they have for all others. The monologue is delivered, for the most part, dead on to the camera, emphasizing the fact that for Charlie, this wasn't just an in-character plea to fictional soldiers. This was Charlie directly addressing the audience to remember their own humanity and begging them to care about the plights of others aside from themselves. And you know what? It worked. Despite previous American apathy on the subject, The Great Dictator wound up being a commercial and critical success, easily making back its money at the box office. What's more, the film had a direct impact on the shift in American opinions for World War II as a whole. Before the film's release in 1941, over 90% of Americans opposed going to war with Germany and the Axis powers, with almost 70% believing that we shouldn't even help the British in their fight against the Blitzkrieg. But by 1941, 6 months after the film's release, 68% of Americans had shifted in favor of going to war with Germany and the Axis powers, arguing that it was the only way to defeat them. The Great Dictator influenced a string of other World War II propaganda films that also emphasized America's need to join the war efforts. According to an article by the New York Times, Charlie Chaplin was even subpoenaed by the Senate at one point for accusations of the film being provocative anti-fascist propaganda, which, kind of was. And America, still deep in our isolation period, wasn't exactly happy with that. This would not be the last time Charlie Chaplin would be investigated by the American government for his anti-fascist leftist views. During the Red Scare and the activities of the House Un-American Activities Committee, Charlie Chaplin would finally release a statement saying, "I am not a communist, neither have I ever joined any political party or organization in my life. I am what you call a peacemonger. I hope this will not offend you, so please state definitively when I am to be called to Washington." The film was heavily influential in showing Americans as a whole that joining the war efforts was not just something that you should do to support your allies, but something that you should do in order to fight for the preservation of the good in humanity. And it all strived from one monologue from a man who wanted to make a difference in society. Charlie Chaplin's monologue is often regarded as one of the greatest in film history, even being selected for preservation in 1997 for the United States National Film Registry. It's been sampled in over 40 songs and been used in various media throughout history. Most samples and clips of the film that are shared mostly focus on the later half of the monologue. However, I'm going to play it here in its entirety. I feel as though the beginning portions of it are equally as important and far overlooked in its impact as a whole.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Lately, it feels like every 3 to 5 business days, some new film comes out that stirs up some sort of controversy, usually one that stars any sort of marginalized person, be they black, brown, gay, trans, disabled, basically anyone that the Nazis rounded up and sent to concentration camps during their regime. Every time one of these movies comes out, I hear the same tired discussion and debate. Why does it have to be so political? Can't we leave the politics out of Hollywood? Yet these same people will go on and make their own political movies and pat themselves on the back for how brave they are to do so. But then they go on to trash the Barbie movie for mentioning the patriarchy and making commentary about the ways women are treated in society. But to those who complain about mermaids being black making a film too woke or too entrenched in politics, let me just say, film has always been political. It will always be political. Because art, in and of itself, is a political thing just through the sheer act of making an expression of one's views on society. You can't escape politics and political views. And if you think, God, that's just exhausting. Yeah, it is. For those of us whose very identities themselves are deemed as political, the sheer act of existing is exhausting. We wish we could escape it too. Despite losing Best Musical to Avenue Q in 2004, Wicked has maintained its relevance throughout the decades, with history only looking more and more unkindly upon Avenue Q's avoidance of making any sort of real statement of its featured subjects. Though they depict things like racism, homophobia, homelessness, and the like, the whole opinion of these things seems to be, what can you do? It'll pass. No, it won't. That's precisely why Wicked continues to sell out tickets for shows and theaters, because it states that it shouldn't be like this, and the only way it will pass is if those who can do something about it, do something about it. It's not just for now, when not everyone is going to survive now. So if you're tired of art being political, yeah, you know what? Me too. I long for the days when I could watch Independence Day and just enjoy a dumb-as-rocks alien invasion film without understanding the cultural context and xenophobia surrounding its resurgence during times of unrest and fears of invading foreign forces. I wish I could watch the Barbie movie and a silly little story about a doll without thinking about the many times I felt inadequate because I'm not what society says the ideal woman is. Just because I find these films enjoyable and relatable doesn't mean I enjoy relating to them. I don't want my experience and my life to be political, but I can't escape the fact that it is. This is not a new phenomenon either, not even in Western media. People argue all the time about how they're tired of comic books becoming political, but the comic book industry, largely started by Jews in America, was political to begin with. The first edition of Captain America, the first of Marvel Comics and their creators Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, depicted on its cover an image of Captain America punching Hitler in the face. Steve Rogers himself was a purposefully Aryan-looking hero created by Jewish scientists in order to liberate Jews from the Nazis, especially making him a golem metaphor. People complain about X-Men becoming woke when it was largely influenced by the civil rights movement going on in the 1960s at the time of its publication. Even Lord of the Rings, which everyone has argued about becoming political with the implementation of Prime Video's Rings of Power series, it's always had political undertones, with J.A.R. Tolkien using Jewish people as an inspiration for the race of dwarves in an attempt to give us positive representation and influence positive opinions on us during World War II, when again, our identities were seen as largely political. Politics has always been involved in your art. You just don't like it when you can't ignore it anymore. So yes, I'm tired of talking about politics, but more than that, I'm tired of politics constantly talking about me. And with things getting more and more terrifying, with the many executive orders made by Donald Trump and the onslaught of constant attempts to overthrow our Constitution by Elon Musk, the gutting of civil protections for women, black people, brown people, disabled people, and the like, and the cherry on top being the shutting down of departments of the government that are supposed to enforce equality in our laws. Life is... I'm just tired. But despite how tired I am, I'm not gonna stop. I'm not gonna stop existing, and I'm not gonna be silent. Because I believe what Charlie Chaplin said in The Great Dictator. I believe that hate is taught and that we as humans want to live by each other's happiness and not by each other's misery. I will continue to commit the sin of empathy because I know that the hate of men will pass and dictatorships die. And I know that if we all remember these words that once changed a nation, we ourselves can fix things for the better. And if you're like me and told that you're wrong in just the sheer act of being, just know you're not. You are valid. You are beautiful. And if we remember the importance of community and being together, we can make a better world, because it's what we all deserve. I'm so sorry it's been so long since I uploaded a video. Between the insanity of our world right now, the LA wildfires that had me in a panic because I'm one of the idiots who lives in Southern California, and then our current administration, and on top of all of that, I had finals and got in a scooter accident this past month, which severely sprained my arm. It's finally starting to heal, thank God. If you ever want to learn how to fly, don't do it on a scooter. I just wasn't able to create content. January felt like a year. So if you could like and share this, please, that really helps the algorithm, as it kind of punishes you if you take too long of a break. And I also just think that this message is so important for people to hear. This video's Patreon shout out goes to Kate, our newest member of our Patreon. Thank you so much for joining. Talking to you guys, having community in the Patreon really just helps me stay sane right now when things are just absolutely insane. If you'd like to join our Patreon or our YouTube memberships to gain early access to videos or even some exclusive content like what I'm learning from my MFA program so that I can teach people how to write for screen, please check out our YouTube memberships or Patreon via the link down below. With all of that said, I'm tired. I'm so very, very tired. But I am so happy that you're here with me. And I hope you stay here for a while. Cozy up. On Fridays, we have cookies.